Welcome back to our final day for Season 1 of 2020 Hearthstone Grandmasters, and it is our penultimate match now, Gia, between our second semi-finalists in Surrender and Posesi, fighting for the chance to go up against Glory in the finals overall. And I can't really decide who I want more to go through to the finals. There's such great stories, no matter how you break it down. For Posesi, a newcomer, such a strong performance for him so far through APAC, be it through the Swiss more so, and to a somewhat lesser extent the round robin, which would also solidify us with a guaranteed Japanese player going through to the World Champs. But also Surrender. I mean, I think that would just make it the two best players this season, pretty undeniably, going through to the finals, which would be such a great way to close things out.
And imagine just another Worlds appearance by Surrender. What is it now?
Oh.
Three Worlds where he would qualify to if he wins this one. That's just insane. Incredibly consistent. And Surrender, I'd say, I don't know, that would rival only Kranich, I suppose, who hasn't even been in Grandmasters this year. But for Surrender, he still has that strategy of leaving up the warrior, which would also be a cool story. Imagine the king of APAC or whoever gets crowned at the finals is somebody who's just been going against the grain.
That's right, and continuing to do so with this leave up the warrior strategy for Surrender. And it worked out very interestingly the last time we saw him, because obviously when most players have been leaving up warrior throughout the season of round robin, which has been known to happen, primarily the players from Hong Kong were pioneering this strategy at first. The warrior was just kind of winning. You know, you'd leave it up and it would get a win at the start and you'd say, it's still warrior. I still would just rather face that than demon hunter. But for Surrender, he's kind of been starting to actually rack up the wins against warrior.
And you draw a comparison to Blitzchung and Kin in that they were leaving up warrior in the earlier weeks, but I would argue that was not so much their strategy, but more of a resulting ban after they had kind of fleshed out how their lineup matches up against their opponents. For Surrender, and also just particularly this weekend Rivius, I think that he's deliberately built a lineup with leaving up warrior in mind. Not so much that he's trying to target it, but he's planned that he would rather ban Demon Hunter every single time against the majority of the field. He stayed consistent about it, and for that much I gotta respect him. But it just seems like in practice Highlander Hunter doesn't quite have that favorability. However, for Surrender, he's had the most success with that particular matchup.
Exactly, and it's not just about whether or not it's a good matchup straight up for either the Demon Hunter or the regular Hunter up against Warrior. It's you've got to compare that matchup to Demon Hunter, which is the deck he is banning. And for the Druid, for example, I think you could make a very strong argument that you would rather face Warrior than you would Demon Hunter because of how abysmal that matchup seems to be for the Druid. You could also make that argument for the Highlander Hunter, where you would just rather face Warrior than the Demon Hunter. So whether or not it's going to work out is still yet to be seen, but I like the thinking for Surrender in this leave Warrior up lineup. And to start things off, Gia, yet again, we are seeing Warlock versus Druid, and it is just going back and forth in this region.
Definitely. That last matchup between Alutamu and Glory went all the way to the end of Glory's deck, and despite a Ysera discarded, still managed to get the win with that timely Soul of the Forest. For Surrender, though, I think it's going to go in a more classic fashion, at least for the first game plan of the Druid, which is try and get that Mount Seller board ASAP. But Posesi's got a pretty good hand also, just Questing Explorer and Sense Demons for cycle.
It is looking like a decent start for sure. It's also taking a look at the list once again for Posesi. Sorry, I'm just trying to remember if he's playing the Kartuts or the Abyssal Summoners in his list. Again, along with the rest of the Japanese players, he is going for the Kartut version. So just drawing through to his pressure is not quite so much of a valid plan. It is once again all about finding the plot twist in order to cycle through for the quest.
Yep, but that's a Mount Seller discarded for Surrender. Already just a fourth of the threats that he can put out the window. I tend to include both Glowflies as one threat, just because it's not very good against Warlock. And then you have the other Mount Seller and Ysera.
Okay, Surrender starting to get closer to that kind of early question that you can answer to the quest lock of whether or not you have the answer to Glowfly Swarm. very unlikely to win, of course, as we've seen time and time again, but it's just a hurdle to throw along the way that can potentially trip them up.
And here for Surrender, the hand has plenty of expensive cards. He looks to be in dire need of ramp, but I don't think it justifies drawing too aggressively towards it. Oh, I'm just not getting my reads right on when is it draw and when is it cycle with the Rising Winds. I feel that for Surrender, he's gonna hope to dump cards soon, especially with double overflow in hand. But I can also understand cycling to get towards cheaper spells to pair with the Mount Seller.
What to do?
Right.
Yeah, I think this, at the moment, just kind of... none of these cards you really want to be dumping because they all get so much better on the big Mount Seller turn. And I think what we've consistently seen is that 1 or 2 minions being generated is very easy for the Quest Warlock to deal with. They can go for a Moarg Netherbreath on the exotic Mount Seller and you're not that bad. Even though I fully see your point that you want to start dumping for overflow, you just take a couple of chill turns, you don't even have to worry about Abyssal Summoners quite yet, which is another point to Surrender's play, and then you just pop off on turn 7 and hope that that wins you the game on its own.
Very good point. Especially since the way Surrender's hand is shaping up. It looks to be Glowfly into Mount Seller and then Overflow, at which point you've probably dumped enough cards to make full room for the Overflow anyway. But of course, we are just going to see the first question asked by the Druid there. And Posesi, of course, has an answer. Not the Netherwing with no additional dragon in hand, but he has more of Fire.
Yeah, and I mean, in a way, you'd almost prefer that because you just get to have another tap-in, which is, again, just so important. Argument for throwing down a Mortal Coil first, I suppose, in order to keep the card draw rolling.
Then you would have to coin out the tap. I feel it's roughly equivalent, right?
Yeah.
But
I like it.
Posesi is going for full cycle. Okay.
Yeah, the absolute maximum card draw possible. Because again, the tempo plan with his version of the deck just doesn't really work. You have to hit the quest completion.
Yeah, can get behind it, especially since if he doesn't have anything particularly threatening to remove, at worst, he can still just play Kartut on 6.
Well, we are most certainly gearing up for an insane play on the next turn with a very large exotic Mount Seller. And the kind of worst thing for Posesi is that the Moarg staying on board is actually just pretty good for Surrender, because he can kill off anything that Posesi develops on the following turn, and then the Moarg.
Yeah, the Bog Beams and the Moonfires are pretty insane here. It does, of course, mean Surrender has to dump something this turn. And I'm looking at the power of the Wild, strangely enough, even though he's developing a big board next turn. It's because the Innervate only gets him that 1 extra mana, not enough to play Power of the Wild on top of that same turn.
Yeah, it does mean that your opponent can smash in the Moarg Artificer. It's almost to the point where I'm wondering if he should go Power of the Wild for buff, just because you'd rather have nothing on the board, or just take the overdraw here.
Probably more reasonable.
I don't know.
It depends. The average draw off the top isn't more valuable than Power of the Wild.
Yeah.
I could not tell you.
Very hard to say. Of course, there is still Ysera waiting in the wings, which you do not want to be discarding at all.
I definitely like, though, that he left the Moarg on the board. I think a very salient point that you make. And now Posesi surely has to be expecting the Mount Seller after Surrender spent that much time gearing up for it. So the question now is whether he would want to front load that 6 mana, get the Kartut on board, or even an Aranasi because it has more attack power, or whether he wants to cycle and get towards a better possible response.
Yeah, now finally slowing down because his hand is filling up and just trying to develop what he can.
Well, that was definitely a draw that he would rather have here than Power of the Wild, I think. Or is it? Looks like he has pretty much a... okay, close to a full board anyway, but double Owls. Can he not hit the bingo here? Alright, there you go, but still not a great beast.
It's a very, very impressive board. He's wondering whether he should throw down the Iron Bark. It's a turn away from the Twisting Nether, and Coin has been used. I think you just go all in here.
And if you do buff something, there's a question of whether you buff the Cobra to get it out of range of the Crazed Netherwing, or the Mount Cellar itself to get that out of range of second Moarg Nether Breath. But because I just had the word second there, I'm looking at the Cobra.
Yeah. Me too.
You can make an argument for the Raven too, just because it's more attack. Also, it doesn't immediately die to a Crazed Netherwing.
Yeah, and that would die to like Moarg plus Rain of Fire, which is, I guess, a consideration as well. That means you're more resilient to that overall.
Posesi still doesn't have a dragon in hand though, but he drew the
That's
second
true.
Moarg. And there are 9 cards in hand right now. If he starts with Moarg Nether Breath on Mount Cellar, Box of Dark Sky remaining for 12 damage. Sorry, 7 procs for 14. Not quite enough.
17 healing, I believe, if he just goes double Rain of Fire, which is not quite a clear. Which means you need to wonder what are the chances you can go double Rain of Fire plus a Soul Fire to fully clear the board, which seems unlikely for sure. Double Dark Sky, sorry.
It's like he's starting off this way and then just going for the Moarg Nether Breath. That actually works out great for him. And
very clean.
I think that was close to an average outcome, right? There were so many owls there likely to die to a single proc. I think that was a not intuitive ordering from Posesi there, but well spotted that for that particular board from Druid.
Very, very nicely done. But of course, the follow-up is very cleanly there for Surrender. He is digging through to Ysera. Obviously, the second Mount Cellar has now gone off of the Fungal Fortune, so along with the Glowfly Swarm as well, he's actually running pretty light on threats now. So he needs to be very cautious about how he throws down this Fungal Fortunes, because we've seen a couple of players now, Gia, discarding the Ysera in the Druid deck, which almost led to disaster.
I mean, we've seen players not running the Ysera, like Posesi and Alutamu, but we'll get into that later. There's a very good point that you make, because Glory did end up discarding it. I think that, in hindsight, was probably deliberate to take the risk, because he knew that if he could just land that last Glowfly plus Soul of the Forest board immediately, that could be his ticket to victory. For Surrender, though, I think he has to be a bit more measured with how he plays the Fungal Fortunes.
It would definitely appear that way. But now, Posesi, I think, will just be continuing along with the taps here wherever possible. And then, I don't know, I guess Aranasi?
Oh, I was looking at Keladan. Maybe that's too reactive. But you have just seen both Mount Cellars. The Keladan can deal with Ysera as a singular body, but of course there's that big high roll upside if you hit the Plot Twist and draw it back. It's another Nether.
I mean, you say big high roll potential with only a third of the deck left. I think if you do hit the Plot Twist, it's fairly likely that you are going to be hitting Keladan off the top later on for a full way to clear off all the dragons.
Posesi still hasn't hit it though, bottom 10.
Yeah, that's pretty rough.
Easily 1-1 there. Okay, very awkward for Surrender that he's not at 10 natural mana, so the Wild Growth and Oath can't cycle just yet. Oh, this is so rough, actually.
I mean, for who? For both of these players, it's awful.
Okay, this turn from Surrender. Of course, he can try and cycle with the Fungal Fortunes, but it is so scary.
Yeah.
He could adopt the Glory mindset of, if you discard Ysera, at least you're getting closer to second Glowfly and Soul of the Forest, which is, you know, very powerful, given that he has double Power of the Wild, double Savage Roar in hand. He's going for it.
He's just doing it, Gia.
Whoa, dodged a bullet there. Okay, granted, it was 8 cards in the deck, 3 shots. Not that likely to get the Ysera, and he's rewarded.
Yeah, now we're looking at just get some cards out of your hand, make sure you don't overdraw. And at 9 cards, he's still safe. Okay.
Yep. Goes for dumping essentially an overgrowth to get the additional spell from Wild Growth. Gearing up for Ysera.
Sure, yeah. Well, that's yet another piece of card draw if he needs it with the Questing Explorer. But at this point, I'm wondering, yeah, if he just starts going on the offensive. Alexstrasza comes down while Surrender wants to play out just the Ysera on the following turn. And Posesi knows it.
In theory, I like this, but it's so risky given that he doesn't have another dragon for the Netherwing if he needs it for Glowfly board. But if the play is just development from Surrender, Posesi could just try and kill him, actually.
But with like 2 or even arguably 3 draws for Posesi, he's so likely to find either one of the 2 dragons left or a plot twist in his deck. It's over half his deck at this point.
Very good point. Yeah, the tempo loss from not playing an 8-8 here, probably too costly. He has a cycle for the Soul of the Forest from this excess mana. It's what Surrender wants to hit here. Or Ysera. Big draw.
Whoa.
I think you're slamming that in the Iron Bark.
It's a little scary though, isn't it? Because it's just a couple of cards to allow 8 damage to connect face here.
Well, he can kill off the Alex with Bogbeam Iron Bark trade.
That's true.
Okay. I like the sound of that, especially since his board is just refilling after this.
Time waits for no one.
I think he's also looking at Glowfly's Soul of the Forest. But oh, really? The Ysera looks so good here, though.
But he doesn't have Soul of the Forest in hand. It's just double buff here instead.
Sorry, I meant Power of the Wild there, yeah.
Right, sorry.
Okay, the double buff does play around another... Yeah, the difference between 1 and 2 buffs is huge, so I understand Surrender's game plan, but plot twist finally there for Posesi. Quest completion, a chance at redrawing Caladan. It's huge.
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. Obviously, the Twisting Nether is still knocking about in deck as well. Also, just in addition to the fact that he could just tap into Malagos and win the game on the spot, is a slim but potential shot at taking the game on the spot.
Is he... There's no dragon, but okay, he's doing this so that if he gets back the Crazed Netherwing with a dragon, it's also clear. He just commits the Rain of Fire first. I could not tell you the odds on how to do this optimally, but I definitely get the mindset.
Obviously, he can still hit Caladan, but this does mean he cannot hit Twisting Nether.
And he can't fit in a tap on top of that.
That is a complete whiff.
Oh my gosh, he has to go for another twist. Again. He's looking for the Netherwing. Surrender is worried. But even if this gets cleared, he just has Ysera on the follow-up.
Oh,
not there?
That's not it.
Oh my gosh.
Oh!
There's Netherwing, but no dragon. Oh my goodness.
He just ran out of time. He obviously could have tapped to try and find the Caladan, but at the end of it, the animations on Plot Twist, they are slow. And that is, in the end, what gets the better of Posesi.
It is so rough to see that go down that way. Again, I don't know how to lay out the odds discreetly on drawing a clear because there's so many permutations. If you tap first, or sorry, if you don't tap and plot twist first, then you leave yourself the ability to tap to get something else. If you plot twist and don't play Rain of Fire, you have mana left to play Twisting Nether. But then, if you just get a Crazed Netherwing, it's better if you commit the Rain of Fire. It's just... how?
Yeah, and then it's not... It's even not only about that turn, is it? It's also the fact that Twisting Nether is significantly more valuable going into the last part of the game, because you're going to have to kill a whole bunch of dragons off of Ysera, given that you know that is guaranteed to come down later on. It's so many different ramifications, and I can fully understand the line that Posesi went for, even if it did not work out for him.
Yeah, that endgame scenario was really rough there. And to be fair, even if Posesi did hit the clear, I think Surrender very likely could have still taken the game with just a Ysera follow-up. And then that would have eventually become lethal with the Savage Roar. But there are also worlds where after the first Netherwing comes down, then you top deck the Twisting Nether, or as you said, Malagos just for lethal on the backswing. That matchup is so volatile towards the end game, and I think there's still a lot of room for new philosophies on how to play the game to be made. It just feels like one of those decks where it can be figured out how to go for the discrete higher odds, but not in 75 seconds.
Absolutely. And one thing I will say that we are consistently seeing hurt the Japanese players in that matchup is the Kartut defenders. Obviously, it is not put in for that matchup. You're doing it to help your chances against Hunter and Demon Hunter. But for this specific instance, it's just so rough. And there is just no ability, it seems like, at all to go for the pressure plan until you hit Dragon Queen Alexstrasza or Zephyrus into Tyrion or whatever it may be in the hyper late game. And so sadly, that does mean Posesi is going to be going down 0-1 there. We'll get that score corrected shortly, as Surrender is that little bit closer towards marching to victory.
That's right. Another try on the Warlock for Posesi, but yet again, not the greatest matchup for him. Highlander Hunter for Surrender, his pet deck, and already a pretty good curve in the opener, although I don't expect to see Zixor kept in this matchup. The Rot Nest, worth considering though.
Definitely a consideration. It's one of the cards that I feel like should be good in the matchup, and obviously against exactly the Crazed Netherwing, it's pretty good, but is it worth holding on to without a dragon in hand when you could find cards like Zephyrus, Stormhammer, Dragonbane? I think there's some cards that are super valuable in the matchup you want to try and grab.
Definitely get behind that. Honestly, I just look at Rotnest Drake as the best statted minion on 5 mana. And that's the primary reason I like to keep it in this matchup, more so than for the huge spike on its battle cry. Not any particular minions that early that you're hoping to snipe, but I can definitely get behind more chances to look for a 3-drop and 4-drop, which Surrender has found.
And he's found some pretty good ones as well. Obviously, Scale Rider, sorry, a little bit weak at the moment with no dragon, but just Dragonbane alone, Gia, I find is one of the most devastating cards for Warlock in the deck.
It is incredibly powerful, just how fast that damage can stack up. But Surrender has not run into a dragon here. I still expect to see Scale Rider for the body, but Posesi has both Moarg and Nether Breath lined up for a huge amount of healing later on.
I wonder.
Which is one of the things that Surrender, I think, has a great understanding of, because yesterday when he was playing, I can't remember if it was this matchup or Demon Hunter versus Warlock, but the same principle applies, which was he realized you don't just want to be going too aggressively for damage out of hand, the hero powers. I believe it was actually Hunter, because I was talking about weaving in the hero powers. He knows that it's important to develop at all points along the way, because when they do go for that big inevitable Moarg Nether Breath turn, you want to have as much stuff in the way as possible to make it awkward for them.
Pointing Dragonbane instead here. Well, I was looking at Scale Rider primarily because this is the turn before Crazed Netherwing will be online, but Surrender is front-loading this and also recognizing that Dark Skies alone does not get through this board. And as far as I see it, neither does Rain of Fire into Dark Skies. Because there's 11, it would go down to 8, and the Dark Skies would deal 7. But Moarg Nether Breath is the big punish.
Yeah, I mean, it's bad, of course. Not trying to hide that fact from Surrender. He would much rather this have stuck around. But it still does mean he's able to get a decent bit of pressure stuck onto the board in these early turns.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to know that the Moarg has been pulled out, but you could view it from both ways, right? From the Warlock perspective, great, I've seen the Dragonbane, gotten it out of the way. From the Hunter's perspective, great, I've seen one of their best healing options out of the way. And I feel that that would favor the Hunter more if he had a great follow-up, but this particular turn is pretty nasty for Surrender. 2 cards that pay off from dragons in hand, but no dragon.
I mean, I'm looking at just Corrosive Breath to take it out as the current best option. I know you want to save that for damage as much as possible. Okay. Obviously, if the response is Crazed
Netherwing.
Netherwing. What are you doing in response? The answer is crying.
Correct. I agree. The Scale Rider, of course, is even worse into that if it's just played here, so I do expect to just see the Nether Breath and the Hero Power face.
I mean, the other argument is you could trade in the... You could just ignore it, obviously, is one way to go about it. But I was thinking you could trade in the Bone Chewer Brawler and the Hero Power in, and then if there is a Crazed Netherwing, you have the chance to draw a Dragon for Scale Rider plus Corrosive Breath to clear it off.
That's a fair point. Interesting that Surrender holds off on the Corrosive Breath entirely, recognizing that the Moarg can't actually get itself off the board this turn with just a trade. I think Surrender is hoping to pull back tempo next turn. With Corrosive Breath, should Posesi play anything else? Say, if it was just another wing and the Moarg survives, then you could Corrosive Breath the Netherwing and it dies immediately. And then if he draws a Dragon Scale Rider to deal with the Moarg.
It's a great point. I think that's what this very cleverly plays into, because if there is a Netherwing, he can clear it off and even get Unleash the Hounds down potentially, trade and get a little bit of damage going face as well. Smart play.
I think we've seen it the most times from Surrender, just trying to abuse people's Moargs and turn them against them. But Posesi has a pretty good answer here, still able to clear off the majority of the minions. Follow-up of the Kartut, not too bad either. But the 1 health on this sticking is so crucial.
Yeah, I think Surrender's going to pounce on this opportunity to just get down the Faceless Corruptor and get as much stats on board as possible. Again, I was talking about the opportunity to start weaving in hero powers, and I think Surrender has realized cleverly in this matchup you generally don't want to do that when you have the opportunity to develop board. But having said that, this time we have seen Moarg Netherbreath already.
I would advocate leaving it in if he still had a decent amount of pressure, but if the turn meant giving up 2 4/4s to develop just a 2/4 with the hero power, I think this is well worth skipping 1 push of the button.
Agreed. Kelodan as a kind of budget flick Sky Shiv, showing how budget it truly is here when it can't kill off both of the Faceless Corruptors, so... Best opportunity, yeah, just Dark Skies to clear things off and draw back up.
Thunder definitely hates to see that, and it's looking like this is going to be the window for Posesi to pull it back, because Surrender's turn 6 development is looking really weak. That also does not draw anything.
Correct. And it's almost impossible for him to be able to get a turn 8 Zixor Prime unless he wants to, you know, skip out on the Dino Tamer brand, which sounds awful.
Posesi has quite a lot of information now. He knew that from the... sorry, didn't see the Corrosive Breath, but he knows there's no Dragon in hand now. Means at some point he would not have to be so scared of Rot Nest Drake, for example.
Ooh. Now things are getting interesting.
I wonder if Zephyrus gives Shadow Madness here. Well, you can Corrosive Breath the Kartut and Shadow Madness trade into the 1/1. That's probably not the greatest use of Zephyrus, but
it's interesting.
I don't know. Looks better than Dino Trader to me.
Yeah, Dino Trader sounds truly awful. I think I'm looking more closely at just like... I mean, I was going to say Griffin and Unleash, but you really want to save the Griffin to draw Zixor Prime afterwards. It's rough.
It's a rough spot. Well, if he plays it before the Kartut is damaged, I'm not 100% sure what it would give. Probably Temple Enforcer, actually.
Yeah, I mean...
Or not.
Hex does make sense. I was almost expecting like Explosive Shot there with a big guy and a small guy as well.
At this point, does he ever take Mass Dispel to keep cycling? Probably still just Hex.
Yeah, I don't really feel like cycling is his problem. Like, he's got a powerful play next turn. He's got Diving Griffin to draw the Zixor Prime shortly after. It's just keeping board. That's the scary bit, but drawing into Dragon Queen Alexstrasza does change that equation.
Yes, the downside of Hex is you don't get to push an extra 2 face. I also find it strange that that's prioritized over just getting rid of a 3/4 on board, which eats the Scale Rider. But I think Surrender was looking for something better to do this on the follow-up than Dino Tamer Brand, expecting that Posesi would put another roadblock in its way.
Posesi, though, with one of the most expensive Quest Warlock hands I think it's possible to have at this point in the game, is feeling truly desperate. He has no ways to heal currently in hand. He needs that plot twist to complete the quest and redraw these Aranasi Broodmothers. Because if he doesn't, he is not only facing down Dino Tamer Brand, but also Dragon Queen Alex Straza, and a very swift loss down to 0-2.
It's a terrible draw for Posesi. I mean, could have seen him try and clear the board with Moarg Rain of Fire, but of course he doesn't want to expend the other Moarg with the other Nether Breath still in the deck. Always a little bit short of going for Dino Tamer to the face. Deliberate from Posesi.
True.
We could just see the Zixor kill itself off and then the Diving Griffin this turn though.
In combination with, I guess, Unleash the Hounds. Potentially to trade, but I guess more likely to just keep going face here.
I'm looking at the Desert Spear to kill off 1-1 and 3-1. But you're right, the Hounds might not get any better from this position.
I guess this is a slightly weaker turn right now to pay dividends for much more powerful plays next turn. Again, if you're afraid of Dino Tamer Brand not being able to go face, a Desert Spear generally will be able to clear the way for you to guarantee that.
Especially since he has Corrosive Breath active next turn alongside Brand if he wants it. This is a very slow approach from Surrender, but I think it's appropriate for the situation he's in, where he's seen Posesi have pretty dead turns, playing an Aranasi for full value, not cycling, not plot twisting, far from quest completion.
So many possibilities.
Yeah, it's what I see a lot from the a lot of the pro players, is where they just try and save the Dino Tamer Brand for as long as possible, just for lethal, so it can't be cleared off. And that is exactly what has happened here. It's a last-ditch effort for Posesi, but he knew, to be honest, exactly what was going to happen. And it means, in our second semi-final, a Surrender, I don't know if he was letting someone know that he won his second match there, but he does go up 2-0 now.
Very dominant performance. What looked like a rather slow hand from Surrender, not the premium minions on curve and not that much damage in the early game, worked out for him in the late game. It's a different pan out of that matchup than I usually expect to see, but he was forcing Posesi to go for that early committing of the Nether Breath onto the Dragon Bane. In a way, Dragon Bane also dealt its 5 damage to because it negated 5 extra heal from the Nether Breath. And I think that was very well spotted from Surrender and patient, always characteristic of that particular player.
I think he's just one of those players that seems to take a deck that is generally considered to be quite easy relative to the rest of its field in the Highlander Hunter and just perfect the gameplay with it. Kind of like with some of the other players with Druid, where they're saying, you know, it's just too easy or there's not too many options. The Japanese players, Raju, as we keep mentioning over in Europe as well, are fighting the good fight for Druid, as Surrender is here for Highlander Hunter. And now with that out of the way, it means the only deck that Surrender needs to win with to guarantee his slot in yet another finals of a season of Grandmasters is to win with the Demon Hunter, Gia.
Yes, indeed. And Posesi has the Warrior to take potentially an easy win over that, but his remaining decks, I'm rather worried for Posesi here. It's just crazy to me how much of a letdown Quest Warlock has become. We were looking at it at one point as possibly the best deck in the meta, as that we understand it, but I think Frodan mentioned it. It was mentioned on EU as well, that the win rates have dropped now, not just because people are bringing more Hunter, they're also perfecting how to play against this deck. I think it was only rather recently discovered or just became common knowledge that the way you play Druid and Demon Hunter against Warlock is more mid to late game oriented rather than going all out in the early game, and they've found the way to beat that deck.
They have indeed. And I think Surrender will definitely be on the cutting edge of that, as he seems to be with pretty much every deck, as being, in my opinion, still right up there as, if not the best, top 2 for sure in Asia-Pacific. And in terms of over his whole career, definitely has got to be the #1 spot. And if he does get through there, it will of course be him up against Glory, who is, I think, the other player you could argue is the best player at the moment for APAC with his incredible run through this season. I could not be happier for either of these two players, but it hasn't happened quite yet. Posesi has one final chance, Gia, to get the full reverse sweep up against Surrender's Demon Hunter.
And he is sticking with his guns, trying it again with the Quest Warlock. Got a pretty good opener for the matchup. Nether Breath, always good to have as insurance later on. But as we keep saying, for Warlock, can't just be all about the removal. At some point, Demon Hunter will still just be able to keep the pressure going when they take their skull turns, when they just hit the spectral sites. And it's in those windows where Warlock is meant to try and reverse the pressure against them. Try to threaten lethal, get a big dragon on the board so that one Nether Breath, one Soulfire going to the face can close out the game.
One thing I will say, though, Gia, is that if there were ever 3, or I suppose technically 4 cards I would want against Demon Hunter, it's the Quest, Questing Explorer, Nether Breath, and Dark Skies. This is a premium starting hand. It means that nothing Surrender can develop in the early game will be able to push through for any meaningful damage. And like you said, as long as Posesi is able to develop this into a winning situation where he finally draws Plot Twist, imagine that, he should be in a good spot.
I can get behind that 100%. And for Surrender, the hand, if you are covering the top half of the screen and not realizing that's Warlock, is insane. I mean, against Hunter, against Druid, against the Mirror, this is premium. But in this particular matchup, where they're looking to punish you for overcommitting into a Dark Skies, I think Surrender would rather be looking for card draw, ways to curve out. But you're never too upset about being able to go 1 into 2. It's just the follow-up that I'm worried about.
Exactly. It's one of those things where you're damned if you do, because they probably clear it, and you're damned if you don't, because then you have a whole bunch of 1-drops in your hand that you're not playing out. You just develop it, and you pray that in this particular instance they don't have the Dark Skies, or the Moag Rain of Fire, or the Crazed Netherwing as well. There's too many ways that it could possibly clear the board. And as we can see, Posesi has a plethora of answers.
Yes, indeed. For Surrender, I'm leaning towards playing a Battle Fiend and attacking here. I feel in this matchup, you're not trying to dump everything onto the board immediately. However, now that I look back on it, this is a strange window where he could just dump everything on turn 2 because the coin Dark Skies doesn't deal with every single minion. But I'm more inclined to just weave in the hero powers and get the value. Surrender disagrees, though.
I mean, like you said, it's kind of the point where all of these cards are so likely to die at some point soon anyway, so you may as well get them in for just the the sweep of 5 or 6 damage at the start of the game. I think this is a nice way to just convert these 1-mana cards into a little bit of damage and pray that your opponent doesn't have either the removal or the healing.
I wonder.
Only combination of removal available for this turn is Moarg plus Rain of Skies. Rain of Fire. Not in hand for Posesi, but I don't mind him just going for Questing Explorer here and trying to set up for a Dark Skies.
I mean, the question here, I guess, is whether you go tap here instead, because Posesi has been a player who's shown extreme willingness to take a lot of damage in the early game, and given that the players probably tap and then Dark Skies coin Rain of Fire potentially, I wouldn't be surprised if he does just tank that at the start, but instead, we're seeing coin Dark Skies, Gia. I can't remember ever seeing this play with the deck.
That is very interesting. Well, the thinking for him is that he has the other Dark Skies to curve into should Surrender redevelop with, say, this Umberwing. And if it's Umberwing, rather, he has Rain of Fire.
It's true. Tap Rain of Fire looks pretty premium here indeed.
Even if the play for Surrender were Frozen Shadow Weaver on curve, the Dark Skies would have dealt with that as well. I think it's one of the spots where it makes sense to coin it out.
Fair enough. I mean, he was going to be taking a lot of damage if he didn't, but Surrender says, you know what, please don't have this one as well. I want to develop something onto the board. But sorry, buddy, not this time.
Yeah.
I also
Very
really
well
like...
see.
Sorry to cut you off. I like Surrender's play of going for Hero Power, then Umberwing instead of the Satyr Overseer, because there was a decent chance either were removed, and this just sets up for a very easy turn 2, 3, 4 play of, or 3, 4, 5, sorry, of Glavebound, Satyr, Umberwing, Satyr, then Glavebound at the end.
Well, Posesi could just go for yet another turn of removal.
So many possibilities.
His health is getting surprisingly low, actually. If he, in the sense that if he holds off on the clear this turn, he's gonna take minimum another 7 to the face, and then you don't want to be just playing the Netherwing, even though it's a big swing, because he goes down
So
to
many
a very scary health total.
possibilities.
I'm looking at this being the Moarg Nether Breath turn.
Really? I guess you do still have a response to Glavebound Adept on the following turn, just with Dark Skies.
Soulfire.
Or Soulfire, yeah.
Yeah, both. But this way it works out better for Posesi. It's just that it's hard to evaluate
Big time.
the Dark Skies in this matchup.
Yeah.
Because Surrender, at any point, if he hits Skull, you could run into a huge redevelopment and suddenly you played both of your Dark Skies.
Yeah.
But for the particular pan out, obviously this order is better for Posesi.
And while this is scary for Surrender, he does still just have decent follow-up. Chaos Strike and Sigil Runner to draw 2 cards. I-Beam from the left, I think, if he doesn't find anything better. Just looks good to me.
They will never catch me.
This is yet another pan out where Surrender has forced the resources out of Posesi's hand in the early game. We've seen so many pieces of removal as well as Moarg, Nether Breath for a big chunk of healing expended. But Surrender's follow-up is largely dependent on the quality of his top decks now. And Posesi has a window to try and swing tempo back. However, no dragon makes that tougher. Start with a coil and try and fish for one.
Okay, that fills out the mana quite nicely because, I mean,
Yeah.
until this turn, we were kind of looking at the legacy of Posesi's early turns where he was expending cards very, very aggressively in the starting turns. Now, however, with a few decent pickups, things are coming back together for him with just powerful plays. And finally, the Cartut defenders will start to look better than in the other matchups, but Skull off the top might be too much for Posesi to fight back against.
See it in his body language. And sorry, that's Surrender that's the pose that people make on TikToks, right? To look all
It is.
cute.
Yeah.
I got you, friend.
Of course, Surrender can pull it off, but that is just a lot of damage over the course of several turns. However, Warglaves in particular takes a while to get all of the damage through.
I mean, that extra 4 health can make a big difference. It definitely allows him to just keep up the taps for the moment.
Yeah, I am looking at Netherwing this turn. Just not sure if he taps as well or plays Zephrys for tempo. Netherwing feels bad because you give up your questing, but everything else seems to be off curve.
And I still just feel like for Posesi, you just have to keep tapping through your deck. You've got to find more impressive answers. And Cartut Defender, while it's reasonably powerful right now, there's a lot of cards that are pretty powerful against it, like the Satyr Overseer.
Well, that is huge for Surrender, make no mistake. But Posesi having held back the crazed Netherwings means he guaranteed has a way to deal with a wide Overseer board should Surrender go for
Good point.
it.
Demons.
And from Surrender's perspective, he's seen both Dark Skies. He's seen Moarg. He's seen, I think, a Rain of Fire at some point.
Yep.
And a Nether Breath. He could just say, surely you don't have the next answer. But it's also going into 8 mana, so twisting Nether is a possibility as well.
Yeah, the only other consideration to make, I suppose, is whether it's a Kayn Sun Fury turn, and if you can just set up 2-turn lethal by getting through the Kartut defender. It does seem unlikely, even with a Metamorphosis top deck.
Yep. Because that assumes that Kayn survives, otherwise the taunt is back online. You can definitely understand where Surrender's coming from and hoping that this board sticks, but I get the bad news.
We're with you.
That's the other Nether Breath as well.
That is the other Nether Breath.
Yeah, but surely this is a tap turn.
I feel very much incentivized. This is a tap turn. And he finally gets a plot twist here. Can you imagine?
Okay. Cycle for Surrender. Okay.
Huh.
So we could see Bop the Netherwing, re-equip Warglave's Bop face, and then Glavebound goes down to 12. But he's seen a Nether Breath, so I don't think he's likely to just die from 12.
Be very close to just dying there as it currently stands.
Yeah, especially with the Netherwing, huh?
Right, yeah. It would just be one off.
So in that case, does he send the Glavebound damage into the Netherwing? Or could just send it all face and leave up the Netherwing?
Time grows short.
I think I like just taking the damage.
Whoa. Okay. You've got to be taking risks at this point because he's in a decent spot, but he's not winning the game 100%. And that requires risky choices here, as Surrender is going for. He's getting a lot of damage face, but could also just die on the following turn.
Oh, Kartut for Posesi, but Surrender has painstakingly held on to this Kayn Sun Fury. It's crucial that the Nether Breath, second one for Posesi, is available.
Breath? Plot twist? Well, I suppose the Kartut is also fairly tempting on this turn.
Yeah. It's just the thought that if the plot twist whiffs, then just the Warglaves clocks at you again for another 6 across 2 turns.
Oh! One off? Right?
2 off mana?
Oh, right, mana expenditure, of course,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, 2 off, but surely if he just, you know, does the Watermelon this turn, shoots face, holds back the Kayn,
Yeah.
you can set up the 2-turn. He's seen both Nether Breath now. There are still some things to be scared of course, the plot twist getting back Aranasis, and of course Zephyrus being active, for example, but I don't think we can afford to play around those anymore. There's an argument for sending the Kayn face this turn and just saying that the next shoot ignores taunt anyway, but I think if you put damage on board, it's more likely that the Kartut dies and heals him up.
Completely. Yep, you don't want to even give them the out of that. You need to force him. After you've seen both Nether Breaths, you've seen an Aranasi in hand, force them to hit the plot twist or they just lose. Or, I guess actually, also Alex Straza could potentially save Posesi at this point as well.
Oh, but of course he needs to play it this turn to get the swing face. Otherwise, just the...
Sure.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, he could still have done it next turn, right?
Right, but that's assuming no additional heal, but that is a huge draw for Posesi.
The disaster.
Surrender hates to see it. That's probably just going to be the game. You can kill the Alex.
Yeah.
I grow impatient.
I'm just as stumped as you,
Any outs?
I mean,
I don't see anything that doesn't involve the the Kartu dying, right?
Yep.
And so damage just doesn't get there. Still trying to wrap my head around Surrender's previous play of the Kayn Sun Fury. I'm pretty sure trying to get the extra swing there plays around some breakpoint of healing, possibly the Aranasi.
Yeah.
But I am not 100% sure. Very tough spot there, but Posesi has turned the corner now. He's seen the Metamorphosis, Glavebound, and Kayn.
Yeah, just 1 damage off lethal here with the Crazed Netherwing, so he's going to shuffle in, I guess, trying to find Soulfire for a lethal, or more likely just surviving with the Aranasis to take the lethal on the next turn, no matter what.
My brood will survive.
And that comes off the back of a very unconventional early game style played by Posesi, spending coin Dark Skies into... I'm not sure if the second Dark Skies came immediately, but just very aggressively removing, if that makes sense. And then pretty fortunate outcomes after that, I would say, that allowed him to make up for the card draw that he lost. He had the Questings, he hit the Sense Demons, and eventually was able to just attrition the Demon Hunter. Not something that happens very often in the matchup.
Yeah, especially with all the card draw that Surrender has chock full in his deck list. He is running, obviously, the Crimson Sigil Runners, a copy of Spectral Sight, the mandatory to Skull of Gul'dan at this point as well. And even then, was still not able to get over the finish line. I suppose the big difference maker, as is oftentimes the case, is whether or not you hit a big Altruis, which Surrender missed for the entire game, so he couldn't go for one big sweeping over-the-top lethal, even past the taunts. But I really like the way he played the early game, I will say. I think setting up for maximum development in like the hyper early game of turns 1 and 2 meant that he was able to, on average, get in a fair bit of chip damage. And you could even argue it forced Posesi to make that play of going coin into Dark Skies, which you never want to do.
Yeah, a very interesting pan out. Every time I see Demon Hunter mirrors and Quest Warlock mirrors and this matchup against each other, I feel like I'm learning something new, even though the meta for others is getting a little bit stale. I completely understand that because I've had my fill of Druid mirrors for this season. But of course, this does mean Posesi's back in the series and it could possibly queue up a pretty good matchup with this warrior. The problem still stands, though, that he has to get that Druid through Surrender's Demon Hunter to have a shot at making it to finals.
And he's decided to get the bad bit off first. He's just ripping off the Band-Aid here with Druid into Demon Hunter. A pretty disastrous matchup based on the stats here in Grandmasters, and I think also just in the overall perception amongst the Hearthstone community. Not only are you facing against an incredibly powerful, aggressive early game, which has traditionally been Druid's bane throughout all of Hearthstone, you also have Altruis for clears on your Glowflies. You have Warglaves in order to clear those off. You have damage over the top of your taunts with Glavebounds and Metamorphosis. It's just every angle of attack that's effective against Druid coming in at once.
Yeah. And here again is the question of whether you keep Crystal Power. I thought the Japanese players were actively throwing these away to go for a more proactive game plan. I thought that they might keep it if they had Fungal Fortunes in hand already, or if they were going second. Because the way the Crystal Power lines up is that if you're going first, you're not going to play it immediately.
Yeah.
And you would rather just have your turn to be fungal. Whereas if you're going second, usually Demon Hunter plays a minion on 1, then you go Crystal Power on 1 into the Fungal Fortune. So I'm doubly shocked by him keeping it on the play just like Glory did a while ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really tough thing to say because my initial sentiment is absolutely to agree with you. You just want to be playing more proactive. It's how the Japanese players have seemed to play over the course of the series, or over the course of the season, sorry, in my opinion. But if you do look at it here, it could save him up to like 8, even 10 life potentially if he's going to be spending his next few turns purely on ramping.
It's true. I think that keeping Crystal Power also lends itself to a longer-term game plan. You're not trying to turbo out the Glowfly, and that is a game plan which actually leaves against Demon Hunter if they manage to hit the Warglaves. You get punished if they just stuck an Overseer. And so this could be now the next iteration of how they see the matchup should be played. Could be about going for survival into ramp, into Mount Cellar, or Overflow, which is exactly what Posesi's hand looks primed to do.
Interestingly enough now for Surrender, with the way this deck works out, generally you want to play Satyr Overseer on the turn where they are least likely to respond to it, which generally means when they have something else to do, which is Overgrowth a lot of the time, very cleanly on turn 4. But here for Posesi, he runs 2 Wild Growth as opposed to the standard one, so he's just as likely to have his mana spoken for on turn 3 as he is on turn 4.
They will never catch me.
It's a very good point. This is the same list as Alutemu, the double Wild Growth, double Soul of the Forest, no Power of the Wild, no Ysera. Still struggle to say that it is, but we see Surrender here, holding off on the coin. Definitely, I think, to get an earlier Warglaves possible to answer. A Glowfly should have come down. Yeah. But what's interesting is that he expended a Twin Slice there just to get the buff immediately on his Battlefiend.
Equals quite a lot more damage over the course of the game, but for him, oh man, this could not have worked out worse for Surrender. If he had gone for the coin Overseer, obviously you've then used the coin, which has its own ramifications, but because he went for this line, we're looking at Overgrowth, Bog Beam, plus Crystal Power, double Bog Beam if you want here, to take out the entire board, aside from a measly 1-1.
That's insane from Posesi. His hand just came together perfectly. Okay, holds on to a Bog Beam. The 2-2 isn't too threatening. Just decides that should a Mount Cellar come off the top, he still wants to have some resources to pair with it, or more likely after the Overflow comes down. But I used to think that the nutty Druid draw for this matchup was, you know, fungal into turboing out Glowfly, but maybe this is the next level of how to play it.
I mean, he did draw Wild Growth and Overgrowth, which I think was a big part of the powerful part of this game plan, because otherwise he's running out of stuff here. It's only because he can go for such an early Overflow that Posesi's in the game at all.
Right. I'm acknowledging that both those game plans are high rolls, right? I'm just wondering if you're supposed to go for the Fungal Fortunes Glowfly high roll or the Removal Ramp Overflow high roll. I mean, they both seem like they require a lot of pieces to come together perfectly, but both could work out as avenues to victory.
Yeah, I would take either. I think I'm not too picky about how I high roll my opponent, as long as I get it done.
Alright. I mean, the Glowfly game plan can be diffused by a player that holds onto coin for Warglaves.
Posesi knew exactly the debate that was going on in Surrender's head there. He's thinking, oh, I've already seen a Bog Beam. Do I go for it right now, or do I play around the Crystal Power? In the end, he buffs the correct minion for this situation.
Completely agree with Posesi going for Overflow instead of a Mount Cellar for 1 Bog Beam, 1 minion here. But oh my gosh, the fact that he had the first Mount Cellar at all was huge. Now he's gotten the second, a Moonfire, and a Fungal. That's both minions, all of the minions in the deck in hand now. No chance of whiffing.
However, Surrender sees the metamorphosis and he says, go, go, go. Let's close out this game as soon as possible. I mean, is it just Metamorphosis right now to get one of the activations in?
Man. It is really tough to say. You can go for that if you don't expect any more minions to be removed, but I really respect the pre-equip of the Warglaves. At the very least, I think it's reasonable to assume a taunt coming down, Ironbark, in which case you really want to have that mana expended for the Warglaves, and then the freedom on where to point the Metamorphosis.
I guess so, but even then, if you are expecting a taunt, you kind of want to have Metamorphosis down, because that takes 2 turns to get through. Whereas Warglaves, if there is a big taunt that you can attack into multiple times, that could potentially burn through all the value in just 1 turn.
But then you can't go for the attack hero power on that same turn, right? Because you would have spent coin. It's, I don't know.
It's very
really
complicated, I agree. But the main thing is here, Posesi hit no extra removal, no taunts, so Surrender, with the help of the Metamorphosis, I believe, will be able to simply push lethal damage on this turn and be our second player going through to the finals.
It's exact, I'm pretty sure. In a very stylish fashion, despite Posesi having an amazing opener, despite him hitting the overflow and the Mount Seller, there just was not enough to close out the game and survive against that metamorphosis. Congratulations to Surrender making it to the final, but you gotta feel for Posesi as well. He was just bent down at the end of that, not even able to show his face on camera, but he played well. Posesi should be proud of himself.
Absolutely. I mean, he was talking a big talk at the start of the weekend, saying how he's going to destroy everyone along the way. But what I will say is that I think Posesi should be incredibly proud of his first season in Grandmasters. He had a very dominant run through the Swiss, getting himself into Division A. And even though things didn't go perfectly for him there, finishing a little bit lower down than his start in the round robin would initially suggest, he still got through to the playoffs, got through to the semi-finals, and was able to show better play than a lot of the most well-known and well-respected players in Asia-Pacific, clearly cementing himself as a deserving Grandmaster.
I completely agree. Just the fact that he came in as the newcomer and made it all the way to the top 4, despite it being his first season of Grandmasters, is incredibly impressive to me. So that's a great run to both Posesi and Alutemu now. But it does mean that the final is not all Japanese. It is going to be Glory versus Surrender.
And what a perfect way to close things out, Gia. As we can see, taking a look at the bracket here, these were the number 1 and number 2 point earners throughout the Swiss. Glory ended up first in the round robin. I believe Surrender ended up joint third, along with Rivius at the end of the round robin as well. Consistently, 2 of the most dominant players throughout this season. And even though Glory hasn't reached quite the same heights as Surrender has throughout his career, obviously, global finals last year, World Champ finals in previous HCT systems, he now has a chance, I think, to cement himself as legendary status here in Asia-Pacific Hearthstone.
Very true, especially since the Japanese community, as well as, of course, supporting all of their hometown players, have very high respect for Surrender. I've seen tweets go out every time one of them is able to defeat Surrender, like they felled a giant. And you know what? It's true. Yeah. Surrender just has that big of a reputation, and he has the level and quality of play to back it up. And you know what? I feel like he should guest on takes because he's proving that it's not unjustifiable to leave up Warrior.
Yeah, that's exactly right. His unconventional strategy, one of the very, very few players, with it being pretty much just him and Rivius, I think, this week, who are leaving up the Warrior at all. Didn't work out for Rivius, but for Surrender, he has a chance to make it all come together. After this break, Gia, we are going to have the final match for this season of Grandmasters. It's a kind of a tearful moment for me, even though I'm not going to cry. I'm going to be brave for these players heading into the finals. So when we come back, Glory and Surrender, we're going to find out who's going to the World Championships later on this year.